Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to you all. My name is Chris Borg, Policy Manager at NELP. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be chairing today's NELP online event on reconnecting communities through community transport. Firstly, I'd like to run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on the slide on the screen. Do use the Q&A throughout the event to put questions to our speakers and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links. If you require any technical support, please do post in the chat and my NELP colleague will try her best to help. The closed caption feature, i.e. subtitles, can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. For desktop, laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labeled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots on the bottom right corner of the screen, then select Captions, and after that, you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select that option. Forgive me, we're just spending a bit of time going through this because we have had some previous delegates who've not been able to access closed captions during the event, and they've let us know afterwards. So we're just making sure that you all, if you want to take this option, have got it open to you. If you're using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You'll then need to click Show Captions. Once the captions are on, you can then access a live transcription of the event. And if you selected the closed caption feature, please use the Reactions feature, the next button on the right of the closed caption feature, by clicking on the Yes button, green emoji with a tick, to show us that the closed captions are working at your end. Okay, great. That bit's over. Again, if you're experiencing any other technical difficulties between now and 1:15, please contact NELP support via the chat and we'll try and rectify the issue as best we can. After the event, we'll send out any slides or other useful information that the speakers have asked us to send out. That'll go out by the end of this week, tomorrow, hopefully, with the chat and any other useful information. And then we'll also be inviting your feedback at the end of today's event, so please do look out for the feedback form, which should pop up on your screens following the conclusion of the webinar at 1:15. Okay, next slide, please, Lily, if that's possible. Thanks. Okay, NELP would like to thank its partners, Clear, CCLA, and Blashua Illuminations, for their extensive support for today's online event. So huge thanks again, and for in past years as well. Next slide, please, Liv. Right, thank you. Right. Okay, so the provision of community transport has become an increasingly important issue for local, i.e. parish and town councils in recent years. With limited public transport options available in many areas, local councils must step up and support low-cost and sustainable community transport schemes to ensure their communities are connected and can access essential services. So at today's event, we'll showcase successful community transport programs that local councils have implemented, and we'll also hopefully provide details of the national stakeholder scene and how local councils can collaborate with other organisations to improve transport options in their area. Today's an important chance to learn about the benefits of community transport, how to establish partnerships and funding opportunities, and how your local council can make a difference in reconnecting your community through transport. So, I'm thrilled today to be joined by a great panel of speakers. Not sure that all of them have been able to make it, but I think at least two of them are here. Thanks for that. Caroline Whitney, Director of England at the Community Transport Association, and Will Austin Clark of Bridport Town Council in Dorset. We were hoping that Councillor Hugh King, the Mayor of Dereham, may have been able to join us. We were told he was available and had the Zoom logins, but we'll let him in if and when he joins us. He may be running late. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Caroline. Over to you, Caroline, to talk about recent projects and how local councils fit into them from the Community Transport Association perspective. Over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. And it's lovely I can see a few faces, even though I can't see most of you that are on the call. So I'm Caroline Whitney. I'm the Director for England at the Community Transport Association. And for those of you that haven't heard of us, we are the membership organisation which supports community transport operators across all of the UK. So my particular role is I cover everything that happens within England, which is about 75% of our membership. The kinds of things that we offer and support are, we do have an expert advice line, so we can help with queries about setting up CT provision, and we offer that support out through our membership offer to any non-commercial or public sector body. So everyone on the call here is very much welcome to contact us for support. Maybe not all tomorrow, but definitely please do contact us. So I was going to give you a little bit overview of what community transport is, because I think there's different perceptions and different definitions. So generally, overall, it is around providing flexible and accessible community-led solutions in response to unmet local transport needs. And that's the real key for these types of services. It's about unmet local need. Now, it could be that the unmet need is there is no bus. So lots of you that operate in rural areas might have seen your public bus services reduced. So it could literally be there is no bus, or it could be that there are public buses, but actually people can't access them because of a range of issues. It could be financial, it could be physical, it could be emotional, a range of reasons why people couldn't access them. Typically, a lot of CT is does support kind of older people or people with disabilities. But as I say, anybody with an unmet transport need can access these types of services. So you could have a fit and healthy adult who's 35 who needs to use community transport to get to work. If there's no other buses, there's no other way for them to get to work, that is absolutely acceptable. So don't fall into any trap around they have to be a certain type of person. And the types of scheme can be everything and anything, from your volunteer car schemes where individuals drive their cars, to car clubs, which I'm going to give a little bit of an example of one I found this morning. So I'll see if the town council's on this call. Right up to you operating kind of 16-seater minibuses and driving them around. And you could be taking people for any reason whatsoever. Again, it doesn't have to just be, we're going to take someone on a day trip, or we're going to take someone shopping. You could take them to the pub. You could take them to to see their friend down the road. You can take people for any reason that they need to be taken for. So it is super flexible. We do have some town councils that are members at the moment. One I came across this morning, actually, which do something that I didn't know they did, but I found out, which I thought was quite interesting, is Wivenhoe Town Council. I don't know if anyone's on the call from Wivenhoe today. And this was a new car sharing scheme that they've initiated by their net zero subcommittee. Car clubs are sharing vehicles that are owned. So you basically borrow a vehicle and drive it for your needs. And they've partnered with a company called Hire Car, who are verifying the drivers, providing insurance and managing a booking system. So that's a slightly different model to what you might typically think of. But again, that's a shared transport model, and it's about making effective use of vehicles within your community. That's the big thing around community transport, is how can you make the most effective use of vehicles that are kind of within your community. You could operate that kind of scheme with minibuses. When you look around your parish, you might have a community group that has a vehicle that they use once a week. And then there might be a school that uses its vehicle once a week. And actually, you can share your minibuses as well as your cars. I mean, the types of models that councils may want to look at, town and parish councils may want to look at could be a model that you run and manage. So as a town council, your staff run and manage that process. That's quite time consuming, but it means you contain ownership of that and control over what happens. It could be that there's a council partnership with a transport officer, a transport operator, sorry, not officer, transport operator, which I'm not going to talk about too much because I know Will's going to give his example on that. Or it could be that you just fund something. So you just give a grant out to another transport operator. You don't really have any say in what happens as such, apart from generally. So you've got from one extreme of you managing the service all the way through to you grant funding a service in your area. Some principles to consider when you're thinking about these things, just from some of the data we've got. So if you are in a rural area, for example, we would expect from what we see currently out there is that you're most likely to either operate a community bus, so that's just like a public bus really, but a smaller vehicle, a public bus, or a community car scheme where volunteers are driving their own vehicles. They're the kind of typical models we see in rural areas. In urban areas, it's different. It's more group hire and dial ride services. So it's a bit different what we see in rural. So you might want to think about the model. And I think the reason that the car schemes are very popular in rural areas is we do see that there's a much higher concentration of volunteer usage within rural areas. So if you're thinking about setting up a scheme, you are probably going to need quite a substantial volunteer base, whether it's drivers, whether it's people supporting you to organise it. So you very much need to think about your resources that you have in place or are going to need to be in place. The other bit to flag is around sharing resource, which I think is really important. When we did survey our members, around half of them in rural areas operate across more than one local authority area. So obviously we recognise within a local authority area there can be multiple town and parish councils. So if we've got a CT operator that is already operating within your area, they're already struggling to try and potentially work with more than one local authority area. So if you're wanting to develop a service, it would be, I would suggest, a good idea to connect with surrounding town and parish councils as well, because you can have an operator then who can operate over a bigger footprint, still benefit your area, but actually you'll get better value for money if that operator can take people to different places and can do a bit more. It also means you will get kind of better value for money from your precept that's being spent. The other thing is impact, and there are ways to measure your impact. There's a social value tool that can be used to measure the impact of your services, and it's being reviewed at the moment, but I'll share the link to Chris for everybody afterwards, just so you can see what it is. But effectively, with the social value toolkit, you can look at what the indirect healthcare savings are, impact on social care, impact on volunteering in terms of a value. So it gives you a financial figure and a financial value that will help you demonstrate, actually, for every £1 that you spend on that transport, it actually gives a return of £1.50, £2 for every time that you do that. We did a piece of work a little while back in terms of looking at the social impact of, sorry, my WhatsApp thing's going crazy in the background, the social impact of community transport on people. So we had a pilot project around 2,000 passengers and asked them, actually, what is the impact of accessing transport on your levels of social isolation, on your levels of companionship, and on your levels of feeling connected to your community. Unsurprisingly, well, hopefully unsurprisingly, 93% of the people that accessed transport said it had a positive impact on their feelings of isolation, loneliness, and companionship. So there are demonstrated impacts on people's levels of social isolation, and social isolation can be just as dangerous to your health as smoking or obesity. It is proven to shorten people's life expectancy. So actually having people that are able to be connected in your communities is really, really important. And this covers all ages. So that piece of work that we did covered young people from 18 kind of right up to people who were over 100. And actually, the biggest proportion of people who said they were feeling isolated and lonely were actually younger people. You might think it's older people, but actually it was younger people. So you have got a lot, you will have younger people in your communities that are feeling isolated. They will have a transport barrier. And if you put something on in your community, you will be able to support them. I was going to highlight a few of the national challenges. that are out there at the moment. One of them is around driver shortage. So this is something to think about when you are starting to develop a service, particularly if you are looking at a service that is going to operate a minibus that's 9-seaters or 9 seats or more, because you require certain driving license requirements. And there is a shortage of volunteer drivers, and there is a shortage of people with the required licenses for paid drivers of these vehicles. So again, which is why sometimes people start off with community car schemes, because there are less restrictions on driving licenses. But actually it's something to think about, something to consider. We are trying continuously to ask government to change legislation, which would free up some of the barriers that are stopping people from being able to drive vehicles, but we are probably a little while away from that being changed. The other area I would suggest you try and connect into is health. Quite a lot of the journeys that CT is undertaking currently are health-related journeys. There has been a recent change in the criteria for non-emergency patient transport, which means there are more people that aren't meeting some of the criteria. So there's a bigger demand for people to get to hospital, but GP appointments are also really critical that people often struggle to get to. So if you have got relationships with the health system in your area, it is worth making contact and having conversations about, are there gaps in their services that a community service could pick up. It's all about trying to get as much demand for your service as quickly as you possibly can, so that you can try and get to the point where it's never going to be profit making, just to be clear, that what the service you set up, but you want to try and get as close to that break-even point as you can. One of the other biggest challenges to think about in this, and we're all guilty of it, and I mentioned it at the beginning a little bit, is perceptions of the service. So there are definitely perceptions out there. We know it, we've had evidence, we've spoke to people, that people think that smaller vehicles and those types of services are only for people, either older people, people with disabilities, or they just don't think it's for them. So when you're setting up these services, you need to think about how you're marketing them, how you're describing them, and how you're explaining them, to make sure that actually, if you're operating a service that can take people to work, can take young people to education, or can take young people to work, that you are really clear in your communications about that service, that it is, it's an open service as much as you can. The other piece of work to consider is come 2035. I know this seems a long time away, but it's not really. There will be government stopping the sale of diesel vehicles. So it's thinking about kind of EV infrastructure, electric infrastructure, and what you have in place, or what you could have in place. Smaller vehicles, there's kind of better infrastructure in place at the moment, but there are still challenges around being able to charge vehicles. We were talking to one of our members who runs a car club, an electric car club, and they were having to kind of charge vehicles in all kinds of places to make sure they can work. But actually, potentially, if you're in a smaller village area, you might have a couple of people that are like, yeah, we've got a charging point you could charge a vehicle at. So it's very much about working with your local authority to see what their EV infrastructure plans are. And then if they're not going to meet your needs within the next few years, because they might not, is kind of looking at, are there community solutions to that, in terms of other things you could do, in terms of either working with people that have already got EV infrastructure. You might have a business that has invested in EV infrastructure for their business that might allow community use of it. So it's just trying to think a bit differently while some of these things are being developed. The thing too that I really love about community transport is around the fact that it is often a trusted service. And the thing to remember is that for a lot of the passengers we see using these types of services, a bit more so than buses, is that it can be often that is the only people they see every week. And that relationship between the driver and the passengers is so, so important. And you should never, ever underplay how important the role of the driver is. A driver is so much more than a driver in community transport. They are often a friend, a social care worker, a singing coach. We often hear some of our drivers are helping people sing. So when you're recruiting your staff, whether that be a volunteer or a paid staff member, it is thinking about driving isn't just driving, it is all about that kind of social element and the impact it can have. And I think I'm going to stop there. I might have gone over time a little bit on my bit. Maybe not. Will's looking at me. I've been kind of keeping a little bit of an eye in the questions, and I'll just flag one of them, which was around asking about which government department promotes community transport and are there statutory obligations on district, county and unitary authorities to fund community transport. So the other bit that is really important is that you work with your local authority and, if possible, your transport authority, if that is a different body. There is no statutory obligation to fund community transport, but there is a statutory obligation to have transport, and community transport can be part of that solution. If you are a community transport operator that operates under something called a Section 22, which is basically like running a normal public bus, you can pick up any of the members of the community, then they do have, in pretty much all cases, a statutory duty to accept concessionary bus fare passes. But they don't actually have a statutory duty to fund community transport, unfortunately. But if we want to lobby for that, we would very much support that. What we do see with the services is they're often funded by different parts of the local authority, depending on which council you're in. So it could be that actually community transport is funded by the transport department at the council. We've seen some cases where they're funded through the communities side of the council. There are some parts where they're funded through adult services, kind of part of the council, depending on what the type of service is. So there isn't even a consistent, it's generally funded from one part. We see it's from a bit all over within it. One of the bits at the moment nationally, so if any of you are involved in transport, you'll have heard of something called BSIP, the Bus Service Improvement Plan. All local authorities have that now. It was a part where only some transport authorities had it. All have BSIP funding, and it is eligible. Community transport services are eligible to be funded through that programme. We do see across the country kind of different approaches to that and differing views on that, but the viewpoint is that as long as the service is open to the community, so for example, a scout group wouldn't be eligible for BSIP, but as long as you run a service that members of your community can either book through a Section 19 or turn up on a Section 22, then they can access that funding on there. But when we get to the Q&A bit, I can answer any more on BSIP. So that's me, Chris. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much indeed, Caroline. Brilliant. You do have a few more minutes if you want to go on. You may have a sore throat, don't know, but that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And let me now introduce Will Austin, who is clerk of Bridport Town Council in Dorset. And just to reiterate, Caroline, mentioned Wivenhoe there. We've got a good councillor's guide, I believe, from a few years ago on community transport, and Bridport featured in there. Other what we call super councils, like the largest spending and income town councils around the country, like for example Bishop Stortford, are doing some stuff on community transport. But as Caroline rightly said, we're encouraging brilliant councils like Will's and others to step into this space, because it's only going to be the case that government continue to retrench spending in future, possibly in this area, but then also along with local government funding as well. So, it's essential for social purposes as well. And you'll hear more about that now from Will. Over to you, Will.
Thanks very much, Chris. And firstly, thanks to you, Olivia and Nal, for inviting me to talk to you today about our community transport work. I'm Will Austin, the Town Clerk to Bridport Town Council. I've been in post for the last 6 years, which is coincidentally at the same length of time that our community bus has been running. So I'll start with just a couple of apologies. Firstly, I prepared a script to do this from, and now I'm regretting that because I'm reading from it and thinking that's not how I speak. So I'm going to do a bit of both. I'll be looking at some notes and talking to you. So apologies if I look as though I'm looking up and down. Also, apology to Chris because he told me I'm not allowed to use PowerPoint, which I'm not going to do. But what I will do is cheat. So I've got my own handmade slides to go through with you from time to time, only bits and bobs.
Will, just to say, if you want us to circulate the slides with the post-event mailing, more than happy to do that.
So I might well do that. In fact, what I was going to say, Chris, is I'll happily circulate the scripts that I've prepared. So Bridport, rural market town in Dorset, the population of about 13,500, a significantly ageing population. I'd say I've just turned 60 and I'm still a youngster in Bridport. So a bit of context for you there. We have a bustling town centre and a lovely coastal area of West Bay. Please do come and visit us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the community bus, and that'll be my particular area of focus today. But I'm going to also talk about some of the things we do in support of local transport more widely. And to say we haven't changed the world completely just yet, but we're working on it. So let's start with that one aspect that's made a real difference so far, our community bus service, Service 7, we call it. And here it is again. A bit of history first of all. We starts back in 2016 when the then Dorset County Council decided in its wisdom to withdraw its subsidy for Bridport's only round town bus service. The commercial operator decided it wasn't commercially viable, so it just disappeared. And in a market town, as I say, with an aging population, important access to our town centre, our bus station to get to wider locations, and our wonderful street market was summarily lost. So a really difficult moment for the town at that point. And town councillors told my predecessor, Bob Gillis, that we needed to work up some solutions. Bob, I have to say, did the hard work of developing a feasibility study. That's the front cover. We did that in 2017, and then engaging with councillors and stakeholders in preferred options as to what we could do to step in and fill that gap with the withdrawal of the round town service. So the feasibility study, it was put together by a specialist transport consultancy. It's a really good piece of work, but prepare yourselves, folks. It cost £5,000 to do, and I know that's going to be a difficult figure for some people. So what I'd say is I'm more than happy to share that feasibility study. It's a publicly available document anyway, so if nothing else, it gives you a sense of how to approach the development of a community bus service. It sets out a baseline position, in our case for Bridport. It shows some case studies from elsewhere, some of which I know that Caroline has already mentioned. It looks at survey information from passengers as part of the development of solutions, and then an analysis of the different options and operating models that might be available. And I will come back to that later. Interestingly, the study actually concluded there wasn't sufficient unmet demand in Bridport to warrant a new service. It did, however, recognise the political will amongst town councillors to test that assertion. And so it recommended that if we were going to go ahead, then we should work with an existing community transport provider to do that. So hold that thought. We will come back to that shortly as well. We set up a stakeholder working group. This wasn't just the town council, so it did involve town councillors. It involved councillors from neighbouring councils, representatives from the local transport action group, and other partners locally. And from that, we developed a proposal to run a service operating 2 days a week on market days. It supports Bridport Market. But obviously has some wider benefits too in terms of general access to the town centre and to the bus station for journeys elsewhere. Interestingly, despite the consultant's recommendations, councillors eventually opted to tender the service, and in August 2018, a commercial provider won the contract. Again, hold that thought, folks. So we launched in August 2018 with a £2 single fare, I think mentioned in the programme for this event, but knowing that the bulk of passengers would travel free using their concessionary pass. So really, we were it was a proud moment to launch the service. Shortly afterwards, if I'm brutally honest, we were somewhat disappointed. The take-up wasn't great. And it's perhaps important to note at this point, actually, that with a 2-year gap between the withdrawal of one bus service and the implementation of another, I suspect that a lot of passengers had just found alternative ways of getting around. And so that may have suppressed the demand initially. And by the end of 2019, so we started in August 2018, by late 2019, we were running at an annual cost of £15,000 to carry about 50 passengers a week on those 2 days. And by my calculations, it probably would have been cheaper at that time to book them all a taxi. That wasn't an auspicious start from that point of view, but bear with me. We reviewed the route and the timetable and promoted the service, and we got to the point where we promoted it as a use it or lose it service. And in fact, that did generate some additional demand and help push the average weekly passenger total up to well over 80 by March of 2020, a month you'll all remember with fondness or otherwise. All that good progress in developing the passenger numbers came to a juddering halt in March 2020 as the operator withdrew the service summarily when the pandemic restrictions descended on us. So that was, again, a difficult moment. It did, however, give us an opportunity to think again about how we were running the service, and in particular, our sense that a commercial service provider naturally focused on profit and having just notified us that they were going to put up the cost significantly and perhaps not really interested in helping us develop the service, made us feel a bit of an add-on to their commercial operation. So we returned to the feasibility study, looked again at the original recommendation of a community transport provider, and then in October of 2020, when bus services started to return, we restarted with Dorset Community Transport, part of Ealing Community Transport, which operates in many areas, as I understand it. So a plug for them. And I'd say that things have gone really well since then. The service feels much more community focused. The provider understands the local area very well, and the price we pay is lower than we would have paid to the commercial operator. So win-win-win. And here's our latest timetable. Just reviewed the routes and the timetable. And yeah, really pleased so far. The COVID break set us back quite significantly, but in the period since its reinstatement, the passenger numbers not only recovered, they are now past their pre-pandemic levels. The financial year, this financial year looks like being by some distance yet the best so far. So really pleased with progress from that point of view. On funding, the overall cost was still budgeting at about 15,000 a year, but actually with those increasing passenger numbers, We're getting back something from the concessionary fares, and some people are paying cash, so we're expecting a lower outturn cost this year. So we're reducing the cost over time. I should say that the service does cover more than the parish of Bridport, takes in the 3 surrounding parishes, and because of that, we've been able to attract contributions from the parish councils in those areas, which has further offset the cost by up to about £3,000 a year. So really pleased with where we are at the moment with the service, and I hope that walkthrough of the history and how we got to this point helps bring to life the process we've been through. There are several key issues I'd quite like to draw out of all that, and I guess my starting point is the political and practical commitment that council has to give to seeing through an idea like this, not only at the outset, but sustained while you're trying to make the service work. We were very fortunate. Our councillors were not only keen to support those in the community whose access to public transport had been withdrawn, they were also wanting to see a service as a contribution to their carbon reduction efforts in the town, to build our local transport resilience, and to address, as Caroline said earlier, social isolation. But even with that multi-pronged approach and quite a strong support at the start, they actually came quite close to pulling the service on one occasion. So I think I would say to people, check that your councillors have a real appetite to be resilient before you embark on this journey, excuse the pun. Secondly, listen to the experts. So I think looking back, we made a mistake at the outset by ignoring the advice to work with a community transport provider and going with the commercial provider. We're finding that we're achieving much more through Dorset Community Transport, which was their original suggestion. That's not to say it's the right solution for everybody, but it was the advice that we got, the expert advice we got for Bridport, and I think it's in a time when experts sometimes get a bad review. I'd say on this issue, listen to them, Caroline and others. So also work in partnership. So if you're a town council, lead and be the hub in a kind of hub and spoke arrangement for your area, and that's, I think, one of the reasons the service works for us. And it also enables the smaller councils who don't have the capacity to develop and implement and manage a bus service to get involved. So they can engage, they can provide support funding to us, and we do, despite not being the biggest council, we do have the capacity to manage the service. So another side to our partnership working is the involvement of the local transport action group, and I don't know whether you've got one in your area, but they're really good in West Dorset. They're laser focused on public transport and bring a lot of local expertise to our management of the service. So a really important stakeholder as we go along, and that means I don't need to be a public transport expert. So when Caroline was talking earlier about section 22 or whatever it is, but I do know what that is, but I don't actually need to know that. We've got people helping us to bring that expertise. So on funding, make sure you're prepared to invest and don't expect it to be cheap to start with. Also, I guess there may be principal councils out there who are prepared to engage in funding, but our experience in Dorset is that's a forlorn hope. There are good reasons for that. We won't go too far down that route today, but be prepared for the cost. It's a cliche, but you can't over promote your service if you do run one. It remains a challenge for us. Councils we're not always great at being salespeople. But one thing I would say is that we did see a big jump in support when we ran our use it or lose it campaign. So we can see that promotion does have a significant impact. We're fortunate in Bridport, we run the Tourist Information Centre and has quite a focus on public transport information, which also helps us to plug our community bus service. And finally, on the key points to draw out of all of this, There will be a range of different options, and the route we've taken will not be the right one for everyone. So I'm not here today to tell you this is the answer to your problems. I'm just kind of walking you through the approach we took. And I refer back to the feasibility study, which set out all sorts of other possible solutions like taxi buses, community car schemes, car sharing, and volunteer-run buses. And I would say, actually, a shout out here to our neighbouring Beminster Town Council, who are now running a volunteer-run community bus service. They were provided with a second-hand bus by the Principal Council. So they got the bus, they've got their volunteers. They've just emailed out with a call for more volunteers, echoing Caroline's point earlier about the difficulties in maintaining a service like that. But really good. I mean, that links Beminster next to us with Bridport, and so we're generating quite a bit of community transport activity around here. So thanks for listening to me blather on about our boss. I hope that's given you some food for thought. I can't see your faces, so I don't know how you're reacting. But I will just finish off with a few examples of other things we do as a council that support transport provision in our area. So, as I said earlier, we run the Tourist Information Centre, and it's a real hub for transport information. There isn't a bus or rail timetable, you can't get there. And we even offer some that you can't even get at the bus station in Bridport. So they are a really good facility that we have. That may not be available to all of you. The centre also it's a booking location for National Express, so helps link in with the wider national scene. We grant aid transport organisations, and so we do contribute to the local ring and ride service. And that helps to keep them afloat. And even though it's a relatively small amount, it's also important evidence of community support. And you all know this as town and parish councils. I never stop saying that if nothing else, that show of support does help enable applications for much larger grant funding from elsewhere. So we think that's really important. We also grant aid the Western Area Transport Action Group that I mentioned earlier, only a couple of £100 to help them with their meetings. They're a volunteer group that lobbies transport providers on behalf of the West Dorset area, and their work has saved at least 2 services that I can think of over the past couple of years. So that's a fruitful investment on our part, and they bring real expertise allied with local knowledge, as I said earlier, in helping us and other providers with their timetabling and routes and whatever. So Bridport Tourist Information Centre, do come and visit. So we support micro transport projects, and here's our fabulous Trishaw service in Bridport. I mean, it looks like a gimmick. It does, I grant you that. But actually, it provides an important service to people wanting to travel between the town centre and our coastal area of West Bay, which is just over a mile away. So, and it's runs through the summer, really helpful to people, 2 at a time, but great fun too. So there are things like that that you can do that have a small but helpful impact. We also lobby hard for investment. I'm sure you all do this, for transport investment in our area, and we support that lobbying, however, with practical work. And my big example, and I haven't got a thing to wave about this, is another feasibility study for the redevelopment of Bridport bus station. So Dorset Council, who own it, probably let it slide a little bit in recent years. We want to see it much more as an enhanced transport hub and as a really important gateway to the town. It's the first thing a lot of people see. So it's the centrepiece of this document, the Bridport investment plan that we produced last year, and a £9 million ask for levelling up funding. And the bus station redevelopment is the biggest single part of that. And only this week I met with Dorset Council, and they are now engaging positively in taking that forward. So we're really pleased to have been pushing for that investment. I think I'm not sure where we are now, but I think I'll probably do from me, Chris. I'm aware, I will just kind of close in saying I'm aware that our experience, it won't be a template for everyone. I think we're a good model for larger local councils who don't want to employ a transport expert or get involved directly in the running of the service. And I hope I've shown that there's potential for partnership working with smaller councils, and that smaller councils can, like us, provide modest contributions to other transport initiatives and organisations that help to maintain and improve local transport capacity. So thank you very much for listening. I've no idea how long that went on for, Chris. I'm sorry if it overran, but I'm more than happy to hear people's comments and answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much indeed, Will. That was brilliant. And also to Caroline as well. I know you've taken us perfectly up to the timings on my chair's notes here, which is brilliant. So just to confirm, we have no third speaker today. Apologies for that. Must have been illness or lateness or something of that nature. So what we can now do is take questions from the Q&A box for our panelists. Please do continue to add your questions in there. I think we've got at least 7 in there already, so thanks for that. And we'll try to get through as many as we can by 1:10 or so, which is when we'll sort of begin to wind down and ask speakers for final comments. We've just been having a look at these. Please also upvote them. You can do that, so give a thumbs up, whatever, to the questions in there. I think they were all sort of, sort of all going to get into office, on the same basis there with 1 vote each, I think. As a few minutes ago, but there's a very good question in there that I'll put to Caroline, if that's okay, from Andrea Vincent, which does need to be precise with a bit of a statement first. That's fine. Although if you've got questions, generally everyone, I'd encourage you to try and keep them short and succinct if you could. It says here, so Andrea says, we have a minibus or car service run by the primary or principal council to provide a service where buses have been cut, but you can't book ahead because they didn't want to upset the taxi companies. If Andrea's council sets something up, would that council also have to take taxis into account, Caroline, in your view?
In my view, a very short answer is no. You don't. What you need to take into account with anything from a community transport point of view is that you aren't negatively impacting the commercial market. So obviously, if you set up a car scheme, so with a car scheme, you can only charge quite a low amount to the passengers. You can charge the mileage plus a small administrative fee, so it's significantly cheaper than a taxi. So obviously, if you set up a car scheme that then led to a taxi firm going out of business, that's not ideal. But a car scheme is also unregulated, so the council can't stop you from running a community car scheme. This is where volunteers drive their own vehicles. So no, I think you need to be mindful, because obviously they are local jobs and you don't, potentially they are local jobs, but I don't really understand why they don't allow bookings in advance. Typically, community transport is booked in advance. People like the security and of knowing that they can definitely get somewhere. But no, you don't have to be mindful of taxi firms.
That's great. Thanks very much. Will, is this something your council's had any experience of? You touched on the kind of interconnectedness of things regarding your council's, bus service, etc. Would Andrea's council have to, or in your view, take anything regarding taxi companies into account? Is it something you've had to do with the bus service, for instance, in Bridport?
So it's not something we had to do, no, but we did actually, as part of one of the reviews of the service, look at. So when we got to the point where we decided it would be cheaper to order people a taxi, at that point we did look at engaging local taxi firms in the projects, but decided in the end, I'm just trying to think back as to what the stumbling block was, the accessibility of the vehicles available locally. We had one firm was really engaged in the idea of helping us out, and they had a completely electric or hybrid fleet, this taxi firm, so that really fitted in well with us. But they couldn't take all types of wheelchairs, and that kind of put the kibosh on it. So we went back to that was when we went to Dorset Community Transport. But I'm not aware of any statutory requirement on a town council, town or parish council, that would say you have to do certain things. You know, you've got to justify your decision, but that's a political judgment, not a statutory one.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed. That's great answers from both of you. Couple of other questions that have since appeared in the Q&A there. Probably one again for yourself there, Caroline, from Andrew Ingersoll, who asks, it's quite a general question. How are concessionary fares paid for? Is there a limit, and how is it calculated? If you can steer, Caroline, please.
Yeah. Will's already sent me a message saying, can I take this question?
I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So concessionary fares are paid to the operator by the local authority. So the operator will submit a claim to the local authority for to be reimbursed for the concessionary fares. The rates, I understand, I think, I'm not going to give a rate because I think that it's calculated slightly differently by different places. There is a DfT calculation guide that operators can put in to work out how much they should be getting back. So I would always just advise, if they want to know how much the local authority will pay, that they speak to the local authority. With community transport, there's a little bit of a slight difference. So as I mentioned before, there's two types of services that typically are operated in community transport. One, which is very much like a bus service, and one which is a pre-booked service. Now, if you run the service like a community bus, then the council, in pretty much all cases, although I was speaking with Somerset and they've managed to wrangle it so they don't have to take concessionary passes, but in pretty much all Section 22 cases, the community bus, then the council has no choice really, they have to do it. With the Section 19, so you kind of dial-a-ride type services, some local authorities will allow you to take concessionary passes and will refund you for some of that concessionary pass. But it is very much postcode lottery. Some local authorities don't do it, some local authorities do, and then if they do it, they might not give you the entirety, they might give you a proportion of the concessionary fare back. So it's a little bit different, but I would, the first port of call would be to your local authority. They are the ones that will issue that funding.
Brilliant. I know that you've deferred this question to Caroline, Will, but any addendums, any kind of footnotes to what to Caroline's brilliant answer there? Or?
Not really, other than to say, actually, you know, I don't need to know that stuff. Well, I mean, I don't need to know how much the service is going to cost to run. I've just been answering a question about that. I think the approach we took means I don't have to be an expert in how the concessionary fares operate or what law we're working under. I did, however, Chris, just want to, reflecting on the previous question about involving taxi companies, I guess one thing we do have as a town council is the general power of competence, which means I don't have to go looking for a law that allows the town council to do something. I just have to be mindful of there being a law that tells me I can't. And that's perhaps not necessarily the case with all of the councils that are here today. So some may have to justify their expenditure against a particular law. Not something I have to worry about, which is again why perhaps a town council acting as a hub might be an approach people want to consider.
Yes, in fact, we discussed on the dry run, didn't we, about the hub and spoke approach, and clustering of smaller councils, which is something which I think, you know, for example, with speed cameras, etc., goes on quite a bit in rural areas where groups of parishes have clubbed together, etc. There are case studies galore on this from LGIU, etc., that you may have picked up in the past. That's brilliant. It does, though, I mean, a couple of denominators to draw out of what you both kindly said are that, you know, there's a space definitely for parishes and local councils to step up and deliver community transport kind of services if their residents need that. You've rightly said, Caroline, it's not necessarily going to be surplus or profit making for them, but it's all about social value and social capital as well, which is clearly the case in Bridport. Crucial role, as you rightly say, Will, for larger councils and super councils. Yours is only going to get bigger, your council, isn't it? And into next financial year, and therefore the capacity in the council tax base and the routes that you might want to be delivering bus services down might also increase and change. So something we'd encourage all sizes of parish council to consider in a context, a backlog of ongoing financial retrenchment since 2010 to local government, 25% cuts, as we know, to the whole of local government, pretty much. So that's the context in which we're operating, which the net effect is an increased need to almost to service community transport, Caroline, in that sense. But look, we've got but also take on board, well, your point about you don't have to be an expert. Caroline's clearly a brilliant expert at this and has some really good experience in the parish sector from before. But equally, for those clerks who perhaps want to, along with their members, move into this space politically, and in terms of service delivery, it's good that you don't have to be an expert. But you're saying, Will, that every council's unique circumstances and size need to be taken into account. They're not all going to be like Bridport, so that's what I've taken out of this so far. But look, let's move on to the questions. I'm not going to make a grandstand, make a statement. It's just interesting themes to draw out so far. Caroline, another one for you as a community transport expert on the call. It's a statement and a question, but it's also aimed at Will as well. I think we can aim it at Will as well. From Sue Gilbert. Just any general advice, Caroline, in terms of setting up an EV car club. Is this something you've got, your members have got much experience of doing, and would you, if so, is there a parish angle to kind of throw on this really at all? EV car clubs.
So there's a CT provider called CT Sussex, which is one that I would recommend people having a look at. They're a really good example of a fairly substantial CT provider that is doing a range of services. And they have a number of EV vehicles within there that they offer. In terms of car clubs, I'm sure they do offer the car club as well. There's a challenge around insurance at the moment for car clubs. So it was interesting when I found the example from Wivenhoe this morning, Wivenhoe? I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. This morning, where their commercial organisation is providing the insurance. There's real problems at the moment with mainstream insurance companies providing that cover for car clubs. Not an issue for CT provision, that's fine, but the kind of car club side, it's difficult to kind of pick up insurance for at the moment. But yeah, definitely we can help if people are thinking about kind of doing that.
Understood. Brilliant advice. Yeah. Over to you, Will.
I need to say that we have looked at setting up an EV car club and brought in a couple of potential providers to talk to about that. There was, it felt like the investment we were having to make in that, I mean, it ran into tens and tens of thousands, and that was just a little bit out of our reach. We will undoubtedly revisit it in the future. I wasn't aware of the insurance problems, Caroline, but I know that one of the companies actually has ceased trading since we talked to them. So we need to see a bit of resilience from that sector, I think, before we head too far down that route. And whilst it's part of the solution, obviously it requires somebody who can drive the car, and that's not going to be satisfy a lot of needs, particularly the sort of things we're looking at. But we'd love to see it here. Actually, one of the other things that was a barrier to us was by setting up a car club locally. If I wanted to use it, I don't know, to get to the nearest train station, which is, we don't have one in Bridport, then I've got to have somewhere I can leave the car at the other end. So unless there's a car club operating there under the same banner, that doesn't work. So for people commuting or wanting to get to distance far afield, that was a bit of an obstacle to justifying the expense. So yeah, we haven't gone down that route yet, but we'd certainly like to see that that idea develop.
Yeah, interesting, because actually, arguably, from this end, local councils, offering any kind of car club is something originally we'd have liked to have seen, prevail more. But actually, EV car clubs, of course, with the kind of green label on them, I think is an additional benefit if that can happen. But of course, yeah, you're right. As with the general power of competence, only really principal authorities at one point, as transport authorities, presumably would have been able to afford the tens of thousands of pounds you're sort of talking about, Will. But of course, even they would now struggle with kind of many of them being given Section 114 notices, and some in some cases going bankrupt. So like Birmingham. So I mean, it's something which for the whole of local government is going to be a challenge. But of course, in some respects, as you know, since COVID, insurance premiums have shot up for a lot of local councils anyway, even in terms of insuring premises, etc. It's been a recurring theme that we've picked up the last 2 or 3 years, So that is something, again, another factor in the background, isn't it, is insurance. Listen, I've got 8 minutes left for taking questions. The three of us could talk all day about this, and it's highly interesting, to me as well. But basically, we've got a question here from Beaconsfield Town Council. I assume that's the one in Buckinghamshire. Tabish Wazir, are there any national grants? This is a Caroline question. Initially, I think, Will, are there any national grants, e.g. lottery, etc., or transport-specific ones worth exploring for our local community bus? This is just also to just get a plug in for the work NELT did through its funding task and finish group last year, which I mentioned to Will and Caroline last week. We did some brief research into different different departments of transport kind of pots of money, which were very specific for things like cycling, supporting buses, that kind of thing. At that time, we couldn't see any that specifically parish councils could apply for. It could have been that they could either club with other BCS organisations or yet again go through the principal authority. But from what you've said recently, Caroline, that scenario hasn't really changed, has it? Or are there other pots that parishes can go for now? You're muted, Caroline. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm muted because someone was ringing my doorbell. And when you've got those things and it makes my phone ring really loud. I've just put a link in the chat to, there's an organisation called Como, and they specifically support car clubs. So I've put a link in the chat or in the webinar chat to their website, which has got the list of car clubs. And the other link I've just put in is to our web page, which has got some funding available. So the only kind of government funding at the moment for vehicles potentially would be zebra funding through local authorities, but that process they're going through at the moment, it closed a little while ago. There's a couple of grants on that link, but I was just actually checking whether I'm not sure if town and parishes can apply for Motability. Motability has a community transport specific theme of grants. They have a number of grants that they offer, so they'll pay for revenue support and they will also pay for vehicles as well. I would have thought town and parishes can apply because it's town, but I will double check that. So, and lottery as well, which I know town and parishes are eligible to apply for lottery funding. Reaching Communities has funded a number of CT operators and has funded vehicles as well as service operation. So some of those big ones. If people can't see the links, I'll make sure that Chris and Olivia have got them kind of moving forward. So the other group that's really good with funding is the community foundations. So if you have a community foundation in your area, they're typically really good at funding these types of services. And also actually quite a lot of our vehicles are purchased via fundraising, general fundraising with donations for people in terms of securing some of that. There's no specific government funding. There is, once you start operating, there's a government grant called the Bus Service Operators Grant, which gives you a contribution back towards your fuel once you're operating, which again is on the link, the funding link that I've sent through. So there's a few out there.
Fantastic. Thanks very much indeed, Caroline. And also, Caroline, I've just copied and pasted those into the mailing that will go out this week. So I'll put the list of car clubs and also the excellent CTA funding link in there into our mailing as well. Will, I know that your council clearly has applied for some money. I know you mentioned levelling up before, etc. But what were the specific grants that your council had gone for, or has gone for, you know, in this domain, or was it is it purely private commercial? You mentioned that you moved on from the kind of private sector space on this a couple of years ago, but are there any specific grants your council's got for community transport, or is getting, that might be of note?
I don't think we've had any external grant support for our work since we set up the scheme. I'm just thinking back whether I may end up correcting myself, but I don't think we have. I think we've asked the principal authority for funding support, and that's been declined. They may help in other ways, but they're not able to provide support funding. We haven't looked at things like the lottery and whether that would be an opportunity more likely to be available for investment, say if we wanted to work with the community transport provider to provide an electric bus. So as a kind of one-off project like that, but generally not for the revenue costs. And I think I said earlier, you've got to be prepared to invest in this. And it was an answer to one of the questions that was posed in the Q&A, that this doesn't come cheap, but so it is important to have that commitment, and it might be a commitment to helping people with access needs in your community. It might be to address social isolation. It might be about the climate emergency. And I think our council has had the will to address those things. If that's not there in your community, then I'd perhaps be circumspect about pushing ahead with this idea. But the important thing for us in terms of reducing the costs is perhaps the contributions we get from the parishes that the bus goes into. So that does help significantly.
That's an excellent point, actually, because that arguably with a hub and spoke and/or just a clustering approach to this, whereby it's either a larger local council helping facilitate an arrangement with neighbouring outlying smaller parish councils, as you've suggested, Will, and/or an area where there is no kind of nucleated sort of market towns, in the rural area concerned. If it's isolated, then so maybe an area like Cambridgeshire, for example, we've got lots of smaller local councils, but covering very, very big geographical areas. Cambridgeshire is a perfect example of that. Then you'd need financial contributions. And I think the examples I've cited before, in terms of some speed cameras which have been provided in an area which otherwise wouldn't have them. Rural areas, usually there have been financial contributions made by the recipient parish councils of the service as well. So let's be clear, we're talking about direct financial input. And yes, there's pressure on the precept, as you both know anyway. I believe the DLUC council tax statistics, the government's council tax statistics, were released last week, showing an increase, weren't there, well, of 2 or 3%, I think, on average, of parish council precepts across the previous financial year, which does indicate that there is more pressure on our sector, on our level of local government, because principal authorities just are either liability dumping or can't continue to deliver these services or manage these assets, stroke liabilities. So there is going to be more pressure on the precept, but I agree, Will, it's definitely something that parish councils should consider seriously moving into as a space. Final question, it is 10 past, kind of links to the wider funding issue of this, but Martin Burton posted a question 7 minutes ago on this, wondering whether or not Section 106 funding could be used, i.e. developer community benefit funding. Is that something you've come across before, Caroline, where it's been allocated to maybe CT, community transport kind of projects, which might not have been in the initial obvious place for monies like that to go? Is there precedent for that?
It's a conversation that's being had, I know, with some local authorities, and I know some have been building in contributions to transport costs if they're building the housing development kind of away from the centre. It is something that Section 106 can fund. I was chatting with someone from a planning department not that long ago, and it was something they wanted to try and look into, but they struggle because there's so much demands on the Section 106 already, that this, for a lot of people, this would seem as something new. Although I would argue it's a lot more valuable to fund transport than it is to build a play area, in an area that probably has a number of play areas, because you often see Section 106 go into those kind of things. But yes, it can do. It's worth making sure that's flagged and raised with your planning department. But again, it's a planning department, not highways, so it's a whole different group of people you've got to convince around the value of transport.
Yeah, no, completely understand. Will, final comment on this. Have you come across in any of your areas in Dorset where S106 has maybe been at a stretch allocated towards this kind of policy space, or is it unheard of in your patch?
So it wouldn't be unheard of, actually. I think we probably could extract, if we were getting sufficient Section 106 funding coming in, we probably could extract some, again, for one-off uses. It's not going to help your revenue funding, and that's really what people need to concentrate on. I guess, the upfront costs, there will be grants available to help you get something up and running, but your annual costs, you're going to have to absorb into your budgets one way or another. And part of that is around the precept. Part of that is about finding other ways of generating income. That's a whole separate discussion. And in Bridport, nearly half of our income is not from the precept. So we think that's an important aspect of it too. I guess my closing comment is we've seen in Dorset the devastation of public transport, about bus services in West Dorset over a period of many years, and it's not going to get any better. And we do have to find some solutions, and some of those will involve town councils stepping up to invest in those services. And I think our councillors have got their head around that. I mean, public transport is only one aspect of that. But if we don't do it, no one will. It's the short answer, isn't it?
Yeah, no, completely. And I think it was a space initially we were aware of from this end, that we knew super councils, the very largest town councils in the country at the apex of that community transport pyramid were sort of stepping into, yourselves, Bishop Stortford, as leaders, kind of at the vanguard of that. I know that it's been considered before, and actually Sevenoaks town councils, we know, have operated in different areas of community transport, like helping refurb and reopen a train station. I mean, the potential for those largest councils either to act as the hub in the hub and spoke kind of wheel will, and or to encourage other kind of clustering in their area of the outlying smaller parishes who are otherwise going to struggle, aren't they, a bit, is crucial. So we would encourage any super councils and large councils today to initially consider it, but then also the clerks of any smaller councils to go to and have discussions with clerks and members on this nearby larger and super councils to discuss this, if they're in an area where, as Will rightly said, there is basically a wilderness otherwise in terms of bus services and rural lack of transport, which is in so many ways, as Caroline said, so important to social sustainability and in other regards. So listen, running a little bit late, but we could go on for another half hour unapologetically, and it's been brilliant, really exciting having this kind of FDR style fireside chat with you both, and hopefully it's been interesting for everyone else listening in as well. It only remains now on a final note for us to just sort of ask if you have one parting shot, both of you, to provide, you know, Stu, on one thing local councils could initially, you know, start to do. I mentioned perhaps that point about clerks, you know, having conversations with any other town councils or, you know, local councils nearby that are active in this space to see how they can join things up and engage in co-funding, co-production of these services. But is there any one final point initially, Caroline, that you've got that you think would be a quick win for councils who want to get active in this space but aren't sure how?
So I would reach out to your local CT provider, and then the other bit would be to become a member of CTA, and we can work with you and help you as well. We've got a couple of in-person events coming up, and I'll send all the details through to you, Chris, to send out. So kind of make contact locally and make contact with us.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Will, any kind of a final you know, general steer based on what you said?
No, I mean, I think I'd echo what Caroline said. One thing that all this work has prompted us to do is to look at the array of community transport providers in the area. The list is much longer than I previously appreciated. And one thing that town and parish councils can all do, to a greater or lesser degree, but they can all do it, is to help provide small amounts of funding for community transport that will help sustain them, but also, as I said earlier, give them evidence of community support for their bigger grant funding applications, which doubtless are becoming more difficult for them. So I think that's a baseline we can all start from. But for those larger councils, I'd encourage you to think about the model that I've set out today. I'm happy somebody's asked me about the feasibility study. Absolutely happy to share that. And that perhaps gives at least a structure to how people might approach the development of a service. And then to work with your neighbouring parishes if you're one of the larger councils.
No, exactly. Fantastic, and yeah, I'll be in touch with you both, you know, straight after this to you know, request those links and things, and we can send those out tomorrow, you know, with the post-event mailing. That's fantastic. Thank you so much both. So a huge thanks to Caroline and Will for their brilliant contributions today. That's absolutely fantastic. You've heard the strategic oversight and expert kind of thematic input from Caroline, and the brilliant kind of on the ground kind of application of a lot of that information from Will in Bridport. That's fantastic. Hopefully that's been inspirational to you. Please do fill out the feedback form in Zoom when it appears on your screen. Sometimes it only kind of flashes up as you're just about to leave. That's a kind of Zoom thing we can't really control. But the post-event mailing, as mentioned, will go out tomorrow, including the link and the chat to today's kind of recorded session. We'd like again to say a big thanks to our partners, CCLA, BHIB and Blashier Illuminations, or Clear Insurance, as BHIB are now known, for their input to today's event and sponsorship. Please don't forget to check out our brilliant online events program for events coming up into the spring. At the moment on our website, you'll see them until September. Hopefully by the end of tomorrow, we'll have launched our next 6 until March 25. So they'll also be up on our online events webpage with an interesting array of different themes. So again, huge thanks for coming today. Sorry we've overrun, but in the context that we could have gone on for another hour discussing it, I think it's probably reasonable. And have a great day and goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.